introduce you to the speaker today as well as moderate the session. Before I begin, I think it would be amiss of me if I do not introduce the organization that is making or facilitating this work, this webinar. The Spotlight webinar today is brought to you by AECD National, Quality Care and Education for All. This is the third of the Spotlight webinar of the year 2023-24. And just to tell you a quick story about what AECD is, if you are not already aware. It was established in 1964 and was started in the Lady Irwin College, New Delhi, in the presence of eminent educationists. AECD is the new avatar, which was earlier IAP, that is Indian Association for Preschool Education. IAP empowered the concerned adults through professional development workshops, refresher courses, and annual conferences, which is something AECD continues to do. IAP was also supported by government functionaries, eminent educationists, and NCRT. It was invited by the government to be on various committees related to child welfare. It was a part of Maharashtra government's Ram Joshi Commission to review preschool education in the state with the BMC for their new English medium schools. And it was in 2008 that IAP was dissolved and the new avatar, AECD, was registered under the Societies Registration Act. The AECD's mandate now is very similar to IAP's, but it's a right-based approach, providing guidance for holistic child development in the 21st century. And it's a little more holistic in the terms of that it not only looks at teacher education, but it also emphasizes that it needs to work with parents, children, and other stakeholders in early childhood education. AECD has worked at the state level by helping provide recommendations for ECCE centers in Maharashtra, for formation of regulatory guidelines for creches and daycare services in Maharashtra, as well as it was a part of the nationwide group that gave feedback on the draft of NEP. Some of the prominent leaders of AECD, if you do not know our history, how do we go ahead? It's very important to look back and appreciate the work done by these dignitaries. Shri Ganga Sharan Sinha, who was a patron and Rajya Sabha member known as Ganga Babu to IAP Delhi, was the person who also recommended that ICDS be set up in 1969. Mrinalini Sarabhai was a patron, and Dr. S. Ananda Lakshmi, who is a doctorate as well as was a very, very learned member associated with Lady Irwin College. What should I say about Mrs. Veena Swaminathan, who headed the Chennai IAPE and was at the forefront of setting up the MS Swaminathan Center for Research. Professor Veena Mastri, at another stalwart at MS University, Baroda. Mrs. Nalini Chogani, who has joined us today and is there with us listening to this discussion. She heads the Mumbai and is still associated with AECD, but now no longer as a working EC member, but as a dear invitee for all our events. And of course, Freni Tarapur, Pune, associated with SNDT Pune, who set up the department at SNDT University Pune, and another stalwart from. So this is just a few names that I'm taking. What does the national office do? Well, of course, we bring you seminars and conferences like today's. We also do advocacy on national policies, webinars for parents, teacher resources, acknowledging good practices and practitioners. And here's a call out to all of you. If you're doing something that you need to feature, which you feel is amazing, do share it with us and we will take it to the community as a whole. We network with organizations working in the AECD, and of course, we're looking at opening new branches all across India to ensure that we all stay committed and connected. So the branches, that is like the Mumbai branch, which I'm a member of, we offer consultancy, refresher courses, networking, professional development. Mumbai branch shares 2 e-newsletters, and we invite you to share good practices. AECD is affiliated to Balmander Research Foundation, which comes out with this Joy of Parenting, and you can write in to know more about the same. And of course, these are the workshops that we have done, spotlight webinars done this year. Mumbai branch is offering parenting workshops for corporate sector. So if you know somebody who's looking at a corporate that is interested, do write in. And if you're not a member of AECD, I request you to take up your membership today. As you can see, the membership form can be filled on the website, and the charges are not very high. It's only 1,000 rupees for a year, or 2,000 if your organization or school wants to join in. And of course, if you want to get in touch with us, we have the numbers and our email. Go onto our website, get connected to us on LinkedIn, on YouTube, as well as on Facebook. What are we here today to do? So coming without further ado, let me start. Weaving a Whāriki takes knowledge, skill, and time. It is always done collaboratively, unique in its bicultural framing. Whāriki expresses the vision that all children will grow up in New Zealand as competent and confident learners, strong in their identity, language, and culture. It emphasizes the bicultural foundation, the multicultural present, and the shared future that we hope to create. It encourages children to learn in their own way, supported by adults who know them well. A kaiko plays an important role in an ECCE setting, weaving together the principle and strands in collaboration with teachers and parents. The curriculum or the Whāriki is a mat for all to stand on. Why am I telling you all this? When we are fortunate here today to have Professor Marek Tesar, a kaiko, an experienced kindergarten teacher, researcher, academician, and who better than him to help us know more. Before I hand over session to him, a quick introduction. Professor Marek Tesar is head of the School of Learning, Development and Professional Practice and the Associate Dean International at the Faculty of Education and Social Work, University of Auckland. He is also the director of the Center for Global Childhood and the chair for Early Studies and Child Development Research and Teaching Hub. A number of hats which he wears so amazingly. His award-winning scholarship is focused on early childhood education in both New Zealand as well as in cross-country context. His academic work and consultancy focuses on educational policy, philosophy, pedagogy, methodology, and curriculum, and draws on his background as a qualified teacher, Kayako. Currently, Marek serves as leader of two leading learned societies, the steering committee of the Reconceptualizing Early Childhood Education, RECE, and is elected president of the Philosophy of Education Society of Australasia, PESA, a conference that he was attending just a day ago. Marek's scholarship and activism merge theoretical as well as have a practical focus on the everyday lives of children and their childhoods in Aotearoa, New Zealand, overseas. He has published over 200, peer-reviewed over 200 publications, and his scholarly work has received many prestigious national and international awards and accolades. Please do go to Amazon or on the net. There's a lot of his work which is available on open access as well. He edits 4 educational book series with renowned publishers and is an editor of 6 academic journals and is on over 20 international editorial boards. In 2016, Marek led a team of international and local experts in Indonesia to establish a research center in the CIMO. In 2020, he was elected as a research fellow at CIMO to provide expertise on future research and development initiatives and programs to enhance cooperation in education, science, and culture. And since 2018, Marek has been leading a team of New Zealand early childhood experts to deliver a curriculum framework and teaching and parenting programs. And yes, you heard it right and read it right, in China. While his research is mainly focused on the early years, his substantial experience and knowledge of educational systems is amazing. why am I taking so much of your time when I have Professor Marek Tesar to guide us and enlighten us on the 30 years of Whāriki, which he has experienced not only as a teacher, but also as an academician and a scholar. Over to you, Marek, and a very warm welcome from all of us at AECD.
Well, thank you so much. Kia ora koutou, ko Marek Tesar toku ingoa. Good evening from Auckland, New Zealand. Namaste, good morning to my dear colleagues and friends in India. And thank you so much for that, Shruti, for that beautiful and really embarrassing introduction of me. I don't think anybody has ever talked so much about me and my career, but I would just like to start by saying massive thank you to AECED and the wonderful organization. And I would like to really encourage everyone to join and to really be part of this important organization and movement, so to speak, that really is looking after and supporting and thinking about all teachers, parents, children, stakeholders in the sector in India. And I'm just so privileged and so thankful to be part of this wonderful collaboration that we have started in February earlier this year and continuing. And we really hope that we will be able to bring more of our thinkers and experts and to share our knowledge and debate about what's been happening in early childhood education, early years. We all understand that early childhood and early years is the foundation and is such an important step, and we are all passionate about it. The question is, how can we scale it up? How can we really think and support the quality, the thinking, how can we bring those ideas that we read on paper into practice? And that's some of those key things that I want to also talk with you about and introduce to you some things about how we think about early childhood education in Aotearoa New Zealand, and hopefully in a discussion part, we'll be able to have a further chat about that. So let me just share my screen. I hope you can see my screen and it's shared okay.
Yes, we can, Marek. We can see your screen.
So I called my this presentation, this webinar, called 30 Years of the Whāriki. And early childhood education in Aotearoa New Zealand. You can see that there are some contact details underneath the screen. So on your screen, so there is my email address, there's a WhatsApp number, there is a Twitter handle. So, and what I really want to talk to you about today is the 30 years of the Whāriki, how early childhood education has become such an important part of New Zealand thinking and why, but also to show you some of the key exemplars and ideas, and particularly to focus. I decided after long thinking that one of the key areas to really focus in this webinar should be about assessment, and I will get to that. So so these are just some contact details. New Zealand, I mean, I don't know how many of you who are listening to this or watching this been to New Zealand, but just to tell you something about New Zealand, because Aotearoa New Zealand, we call it Aotearoa because that's in Maori language, it means land of a long white cloud. And you can, if you look at the structure, geographical structure of New Zealand, you can see that it's also this kind of 2 or 3 islands, 2 main ones, one smaller one, North Island and South Island. It's that kind of long hanging white clouds that are over the land. And New Zealand overall, while the land mass is about as big as the United Kingdom, the actual population is only 5 million, which is like 1/4 of Mumbai, right? So you need to imagine there are not that many people living in New Zealand. New Zealand is famous for its natural beauty and amazing people and very mixed, super diverse population. So Auckland is the largest city where I'm living and I'm located. It's up in the north, and that is perhaps about almost more than 1/3 of people of New Zealand are living here around me. So you can imagine how the rest of the country is just really beautiful and sparsely populated. About 72% of the European people, 17% of Maori, who are the indigenous people, tangata whenua, the owners of the land, about 15% of Asian people, quite a strong migration from Asia, who are our neighbors and part of the Pacific Rim, and about 7% of Pacific people. And one thing that's important, and a lot of people from India, a lot of our friends and colleagues are from India, and obviously a lot of great connections. About 50% of people who are living in Auckland were born overseas. It just sort of shows you how this kind of super diverse, really rich culturally environment is really creating a very special condition for education. I love this slide and this picture because what it's showing you is what happens normally in New Zealand doesn't almost fit the map. You need to sort of go to the top, bottom, right corner, and it's often cut off. So what we did is we turned the map around. So that's that kind of Kiwi sort of indigenous. So and put a New Zealand on the top. So you can see that New Zealand is quite far away from India. We share the same color, pink, but it is a quite a distance. You sort of do need to travel. There is no direct flight at the moment, but apparently we're working on it. But it's still a quite a long way. And New Zealand on its own is quite a long way from everywhere. And the reason why I'm mentioning that, because it's very important for development of education. If you're far away from everywhere, you're also further away from particular influences, and you need to develop your own way that sort of works for you, for the people, for the land, for the environment, for the way of life that you have. So, and that's something really important, because that's the story of the Whāriki that I want to say, the story of curriculum that's been developed under particular conditions in a particular landscape with a particular people at a particular time. The culture of New Zealand is extremely rich. It's a Maori indigenous culture who were here long time before the first European settlers have arrived and colonized the land. However, the colonization happened in a very interesting way, because it didn't happen till early 19th century, so very late in that project of colonization. And when they arrived and started to build, it was so far away that often the partnerships that were developed between Maori people and white people from the very beginning, without romanticizing them or in any way, were really interesting. There were intermarriages very early on, and a lot of so created a lot of interesting partnerships that sort of resulted in what we called in 1840 Treaty of Waitangi, that sort of set, which is still important and valid today, they sort of set the foundation of that kind of relationship that's been many times broken, obviously, and not really followed over the years, but created a situation where especially in the recent years, there's been really revitalization and relooking at what does it mean to live in a country and where there is super diverse population, but which is sharing certain bicultural values, and where the Maori people are the original and traditional owners and custodians of the land. So it's a really interesting environment. You can see some traditional Maori dances and a hongi, pressing of the noses and sharing of the breath, which is the traditional way how you say hello during the pōwhiri welcoming ceremony at the marae, which is the meeting house. You can see it on the right. I'm basically trying to invite you and tell you, come to New Zealand and come witness it and see it on your own. You may know Lord of the Rings, that sort of made New Zealand really famous, the landscape, the Hobbiton, the country, the beautiful lakes and volcanoes, and just you need to come and experience it. It's just like in the movie. And it's that kind of super diverse, really different early childhood education environment that you can witness perhaps anywhere else. And it's because of the Whāriki. And I will try to explain it, how it sort of sits on these very diverse philosophies and produces a really interesting environment where children are thriving which exist. It's a really, really interesting and important document. So let's start. Now that I've done my bit of being a little bit of tourist guide, we can get into scholarship and what actually that means. So the Whāriki on the left, you can see the book. Next time I come to India, I will bring a lot of copies of it, I think, and share it and leave it with colleagues at ECCE. But it's also available online. So if you Google the Whāriki online, you can find it online. It's our national curriculum framework that's been developed over the years. And I will talk about it quite a lot, but I think that first and foremost, what I really need to do is to set the foundation and the landscape where we at. So what does early childhood actually look like in New Zealand? So early childhood is a non-compulsory sector, and that's very important. So unlike in the schools where you required by law to attend, early childhood is not compulsory. And it's sort of birth to 5. So early childhood starts at the birth and finishes roughly around the age of 5. What that means is that school usually starts on a child's 5th birthday. And I will emphasize usually, because officially the compulsory age by which child needs to start the school is 6. But children can start at the age of 5. And I would say majority, 99%, start at the age of 5. My older boy started when he was 5 years and 3 months, I think. So that was very unusual. And part of it is that primary education, primary schools are free, and while early childhood is usually fee-based. Even for the public kindergartens, despite the fees absolutely uncomparable to the private or community-based, you still pay, and the fees are very high, as you can imagine. In the Western countries, it's a massive it's a massive take from someone's salary, despite the government subsidy that sort of happens, and we'll talk about it later on. So there is a policy integration of care and education, which is very important. That it's about how do we care for our children and how do we teach them, how do we educate. And at the same time, there is a clear separation between early childhood and school sector. So they have a different governance, different ways how they organize, different curricula, different teacher education for early childhood and school. However, usually when you teach early childhood, when you study early childhood education, you can also teach in the reception year or in the first year or years of primary. So we sort of dealing with the diverse early childhood services here in New Zealand. You have home-based early childhood education services, or you have a center-based early childhood services. We have even something that's very unusual that's called the play centers, which are the parent-led early childhood services. And we have teacher-led early childhood services, from communities to private to public to partnerships with state. So we have a number of different centers. What they all have in common, though, is that they all use the Whāriki. So all of them use the curriculum. And that's really important, because in order to be eligible for the government subsidy, in order to be eligible for to be part of the system, because anybody can start, obviously, any kind of childcare, but in order to receive the funding, you need to subscribe and you need to work with the Whāriki as an early childhood document. So that's why the Whāriki is important in the first place, because it is the document that the government uses to sort of check and select, like, right, are you using the Whāriki? Right, you're eligible for the funding. Then it comes to the question of quality assessment and so on, and that's a sort of different story. We'll get there. So you may want to ask, all right, so you say system is expensive. That means it's parents pay. It's a parents pay the fee, and so it's a lot of rent, and you need to use the Whāriki. So how many children, families subscribe to it? Well, quite a lot, to be honest. For 4-year-olds, it's about 92%. For 3-years old, about 87%. And for birth to 2, that infant toddler area, that perhaps is that booming new area that requires a lot of support and a lot of thinking, about 41%. The infants and toddlers is a very interesting space because, especially in Western countries, because of the neoliberal agenda and the kind of push of parents, mothers, to be returning to work earlier and earlier after a child is born, the need for high quality infant and toddler settings is really important. And the reason why it's particularly important is because long-termly we thought of teachers as a babysitters. I mean, we had it all around the world, and to sort of think of the early childhood infant toddler teachers not as a carers just for the children's needs, but as a teachers who are able to deliver high quality curriculum and really support children. And we need to be really grateful to the neuroscience and to all the discourses around first 1,000 days and what's happening in the first 2 years, but sort of understand that the high quality teachers and the importance of curriculum and pedagogy is really important. That's why the organizations like ECCE and sort of others are so important, because they all provide this kind of more information, more ideas how to sort of operate in that sector. But obviously everything depends on funding. So current funding drivers are that there are fee subsidies for families in need. So there's that equity funding that's in place. There are 20 hours ECE free. That means is that every child between the ages 3 to 5, and now it's sort of being thought about and a little bit extended to 2 years old, is the shall we or shall we not enroll our child? Well, if you enroll your child, 20 hours of that 40-hour week will be subsidized by the government, directed to the center. So you may drive around the Auckland and see, we subscribe to 23 hours. Well, shut up, every center does, but it's really important to understand there is that proportion of the fees can be actually used. And since 1996, we have officially early childhood curriculum, which is very important, and it's being revised in 2017. I will talk about it more. However, the first version of the Whāriki, so-called the draft version, has appeared in 1993. So it is indeed 30 years of the Whāriki, of the same curriculum document. We only one major change, so to speak, or sort of major change. It hasn't changed the key things, it's just adjusted some of them, is really important. And we just recently this year, we have really moved towards the idea that curriculum really matters. So what's going on in New Zealand early childhood settings? We have learning through play. That means is we believe that the child is learning through play, and the curriculum is really strongly advocating for that. It's very important for teachers to be working on a child at his or her level. That's one of the ideas of the curriculum, is enacted in a practice, that the teachers are actually working on the child's level. They're learning through the play. They're always following and always very clearly seeing what's happening, what the child is bringing to the early childhood center, and to following that interest and creating that curriculum in practice. So it's so important every day for the teachers to understand what each child, what each family is bringing to early childhood center. It's so important to understand how we can focus on a holistic notion of a child development rather than individual areas of development. What that means is that we all know that there is a linguistic development and cognitive development and social, emotional, and physical, and so on and so forth. But what we're really interested in New Zealand is not in those individual domains, but how we holistically can support the child. That means is those domains are developed through the shared activities, where one activity can support development of each of those domains. And what that also means is, how can we learn from each other? That means how teachers can learn from other teachers, which is the traditional sort of knowledge-based model. But how can teachers learn from children? How can teachers learn from the families? And how can families and children learn from teachers? And how can children learn from children? So you can see it kind of multi ways how actually the learning, the knowledge flows in that center, how it is reciprocal and responsive to different ways. And that sort of then results in how do we assess children, because we know that we can assess children in a particular way, and I will talk about assessment and the ways how we can assess. But what we really believe in is assessing children in a holistic way. And the whole curriculum, if you think of it, is about, at least my reading of it is how to live well together, how to become, as Exemplary really beautifully talked about, the Whāriki when she introduced the session, how to become a confident and competent learner. And the curriculum is seeing children already being competent and confident learners. So how you already are, and how can you further become through the process? So you may sort of also ask, so okay, so that's really nice and that may work, but what about the subject knowledge like math or literacy and other sort of matters? Well, what we believe in, not to teach math or literacy and so on in early childhood education, what we do believe that these kind of knowledges, they will emerge through children's societal, cultural, and individual interest. That we prepare the environment for these knowledges to be enacted, for the children to be ready for that knowledge, to tell us when the child is ready, and to really show an interest in us supporting and facilitating the learning in order to become that confident and competent learner. What helps us to achieve that is that we have behind us, and like me, I'm a professor of early child education, but there are others, obviously. There are really others in my team who are also very much experts in early child education, and all of them are former teachers. So we actually do believe that in order to be high quality researcher and thinker and game changer of practice, you need to actually have a background. So what we speak, when we speaking and when we thinking, we understand teachers because we are teachers. We've been teachers before, so that actually really matters. Here we go, the Whāriki, New Zealand Early Child Curriculum Framework. This is what it looks like. Look at the cover. The cover actually really matters. Look at that cover, that logo, the design. It represents the woven mat for all of us to stand on. It is a curriculum for all and for everybody. And that's what really matters. Because that weaving that happens, that weaving needs to be strong enough to carry all the children, all the teachers, all the parents, all the stakeholders, all the nationalities, and all the ethnicities, all those diverse people that are around. All of that really matters. And that's so important. And it is early childhood curriculum that's bicultural, as Shwati mentioned. What it means is that that book, the Whāriki, it has two sides. You can read it from the front or you can read it from the back. If you read the curriculum from the front, you may be reading in English. If you're reading from the back, you're reading in Maori language. But both of those languages, it's not a simple translation. It's just that it's used a different language and different ways how it's written about the curriculum. This is the key Whāriki, or that mat that I'm talking about of curriculum. So on one side you have principles, on the other side you have strengths, and they created woven mat that will carry the children and families through. So we have empowerment, we have holistic development, family, community, and relationships. The four key principles that we believe that if we focus on those four principles, the child will thrive. And within that, we have a strengths. We have a well-being. That is so important to think about the child and families and teachers' well-being. The belonging, the idea of how do we belong? How are we part of something? How are we cared for? How do we feel that we actually make sense of the world, the contribution, the communication, how do we explore the exploration, all of those strands with those principles, if they're mixed together, they create the Whāriki, the foundational woven mat on which we can all sit. So I already mentioned these principles and strands, and I love that image on the left with those hands of a child and of the older person as they hold them together, because that's what the Whāriki is. The Whāriki is a fantastic and amazing document that's been created at the height of neoliberalism, which led us to really think, which is really amazing that such a strong women got together to write and create a document that spoke to the whole sector, that the whole sector was able to comment on and to create such an important document. And in such an important document, there are some key principles that we want to talk about. Now, I don't mean principles of the Whāriki, I mean principles that are underpinning the whole Whāriki. So it's a holistic approach, which means is that there is a holistic child development and child-centered approach. So important to be thinking that there is a holistic child and that there is everything is centered of a child. So important to be thinking about the culture. That means is that children are from the different cultural backgrounds. And when I say that, and I think of India, for example, I think of all those languages and all those cultures and all those socioeconomic groupings, how in certain way, despite we are so different, how we share certain mutual understandings between India and New Zealand, how relationships matter. Without relationships, nothing would be possible. And that means with both peers and families and educators. And I'm just thinking of ECCE, of the organization that's been just so amazing at building relationships with teachers and building relationships with us. And that's what you need in that kind of environment in early years. How do you create a community? How do you create the links with the environment that's around the early childhood setting? We sort of call it here a life beyond the gate, which is so important. That means is that it's not only what happens within early childhood setting, but how that curriculum encourages us and move us beyond the gate, how the early childhood center can become the center of the community, the hub, the so important partnerships that are created with the local businesses, environments, and shops and other sort of people. How early childhood education is the beginning of the life itself, and that's why it's so important to understand it. And how do we develop a pedagogy? Pedagogy is so strong that will enable us to really work closely with everyone. So the question to ask now is, where are we now? How does that link of the Whāriki really links with the idea of who we are? So the Whāriki is underpinned by the idea of capable, agentic, progressive child. And that's really important because the ideas of that we are capable, that we are agentic, that children are progressive, it's really important because it's a complete departure from the past. In the past, we were thinking of the troubled child, which means child who has an issues, who has the problems, and here we come, here we go, we have all the tools, we have everything to fix the child, fix the family. And now we sort of believe, no, we look at every child through the curriculum lens, at every family, and we consider them that they are capable, they know the best, they are agentic. That means they believe that through their own actions, they can change the world and change the environment around them, instead of progressive thinking. And that notion that underpins the Whāriki is really about how the children and childhoods could be different. And it drives that kind of problem-based scholarship and research projects that are associated with the early childhood setting. And what's really important is that underneath it all, there's a scholarship and there's an activism. And to combine that scholarship and activism is just so important. It's not only important to be thinking about what kind of scholarship there exists, but also how do we put it into use? How do we advocate for children, for families? How do we give voice to them who don't know him? How do we work with the infants in our early childhood settings? That means very young children who have not developed the capacity to speak, to use words. But how do we encourage that through other means? How do we know what the child is telling us? So what's getting traction in that kind of whole system is that we need to decenter child in childhood. We kind of this fixated ideas who the child is and what is childhood. We work very closely and really importantly to understand that it's a very complex and diverse environment. How do we create the new philosophies and methodologies of our work? We need the new ways of thinking to address the new problems of practice that all the aspects of AI and New World Order and technologies bring to us. Yet, how do we support those particular children coming from indigenous or minority backgrounds and so on? And that's really important. Early childhood is not just for mainstream children, it's for all children. And how do we focus on those mundane and everyday occurrences and environments? Because children are coming from different backgrounds, but at the same time, there is this mundane and everyday nature that's just so important to research and to utilize. So we can, under the Whāriki and the curriculum, teachers are very important. And the question that we often ask is, what is the role of the teacher? And to answer that is very complex, because role of the teacher in a curriculum is really it's really important that the fostering of a holistic development. There's a lot of things that teachers can in order for teachers to be really effective under curriculum framework. What that means is that they need to facilitate particular knowledges and work with the particular development, and it's their job to recognize, to notice, and to be able to impact and to make a change or to suggest or to communicate. And for that, the fostering holistic development is the key. Creating responsive learning environment means that you actually are in command as a teachers of the learning environment. You do understand that learning environment shouldn't be static. It should be active. It should be ever-changing, ever-provoking, ever-thinking about how it can mobilize and really create an environment where the children will thrive, where the children will be curious, where they will know that there is a change happening. So that's something really important. And at the same time, they will be culturally responsive. They will recognize that the children and families are coming from so many different and diverse backgrounds. And how do we cater for all those cultures, all those languages, all those children that are coming in? Well, you need to be responsive to them and to understand that what's fine for one child, it's not fine for the other. It's not one, size fits all. Not at all. It's really important. How do you build the partnerships and the relationships? Because if you don't build the relationships with the parents, with other teachers, with the centers, with the community, you can't be an effective teacher who is implementing a curriculum. You need to have that effective relationships. Inclusive practices. So important that the teachers need to do under the Whāriki. And when I say inclusive practices, often people ask me, so you mean like inclusive practice, like children with special needs? Well, yes and no. Of course, it is about including everybody and including children with special needs, but it's about inclusive practices, including every child, because every child is different. And often the special needs, they sort of happen. Everybody is special in a certain way and has particular needs, but and we need to be inclusive of everybody's understanding and everybody's knowledges and everybody's way of being. And young children, as we all know as teachers, they are really different. 6, learning through play. Cannot emphasize enough the power of play. Play has been long-termly downplayed as a sort of important factor in child development. Now we know, and we have evidence for that only through play, young children are capable and knowledgeable to fully develop their potential. Yes, they can have a formal classes and learn a lot through that, but it's only through play that they can be really active in the holistic development and where things can trigger particular ideas and thinking around the future. observation and assessment. Now, I cannot emphasize enough how the assessment, and I will talk about it further later on because it's so important. Through assessment, you can see so many things about education and so on, is that only through assessment you can actually see what's going on and whether you are an effective teacher, whether the curriculum really works. But at the same time, power of observation, as from all the methodological tools that you have in your repertoire, is perhaps one of the most powerful ones and most effective ones in here, because observing what's happening and then reflecting on it and making changes and assessing, so important. It makes so much sense. And I will come back to it through the learning stories. Professional development, like you are here on Saturday. I mean, congratulations to all of you teachers and to ECCE for organizing such an amazing opportunity to learn. And that professional development that our teachers have and teachers in India have, that they will come on Saturday during the weekend to make sure that they can learn something more and improve their practice, is just so important. Professional development is something that we have always something to learn. When I come to these webinars, yes, I talk a lot and I present, but I learn so much through questions and through people that I meet. More seriously though, health and safety, so important. It's up to us to really address the area of well-being, health, safety. When I say safety, I mean both physical safety, but also cultural safety, to really respect, cultures and wishes and the family environment of each children. And all of it comes to the point number 10, which is just so important. And it is the idea of empowerment. How can we empower children and families to become really effective? So the key learnings to wrap up this first part of a talk is that there are not leanings, I apologize, but it's learnings, that's a typo, is the Whāriki curriculum, so important in setting the tone of what kind of knowledge is going to happen. Play-based learning makes all the difference if we believe in play. Inclusion and diversity, embracing it, not be afraid of it, making sure that it works, and including and seeing the amazing opportunities in it rather than challenges. Child-centered approach, meaning everything what we do centered on the child, on the benefit of a child, focus on the rights of a child, so important. Qualified teachers, meaning like us at the university, training teachers to be qualified early childhood teachers, means our teachers know what they're doing, have a good qualification, understand what's happening, invite you to upskill yourself, and that's so important towards postgraduate or doctoral level, and so on. Parent involvement. Without parents, we would be nothing. I can't emphasize how parents are important in that whole structure. We need to spend more time as teachers engaging with parents. It's never enough, but it's just so important. I know life gets busy and parents just do pickups and drop-offs and rush away, and especially if dads come and not mom, But at the same time, the involvement of parents, inviting parents not to give up on parents, it's so important. Outdoor learning. Well, this is something really important. I think when I say outdoor, I don't just mean outdoors as in the nature or outdoors in a playground area somewhere, either outside if you have if the center is on the ground, or sort of on a deck if it's sort of as part of some kind of high-rise building. Outdoor learning, I mean learning that happens outside of the gate of early childhood center. Early childhood learning doesn't finish with the gate. It's continuous beyond. And we are part of it, and it's important to think about how we can be part of it. So what we do have is that we have that idea that's called beyond the gate, which means really assembling that, thinking that curriculum is sum of all experiences in and out. Of course, within particular regulatory and quality assurance framework, which is so important. And what we do is what's called bicultural approach, which means that we recognize Tangata Whenua, and we have people from Maori and Pacifica culture that are part of our education system, and they're just so important. transition to school. I just been through transition to school with my older child, and I'm always amazed about how complex these things are, these transitions, and what can we do to ease the transition, to support the transition of a child. Of course, there are some mundane things, but there are also some much more deeper philosophical and important matters that comes into play. And how for us at the university or at ECCE, how important is that research and continuous improvement? That idea that we need to research what we're doing and whether it works, and continuously meet and continuously prepare, continuously work together. So these are the key learnings, Malta, New Zealand. But let's just look at the Whāriki and what it tells us about children and about the child. So it's about the respectful image of a child. I think that's really important. Is it kind of underpinning the Whāriki is that the vision that children are the competent and confident learners and communicators. They are healthy in body and mind and spirit. They are secure in their sense of belonging and in the knowledge that they make as a valued contributor to society. So important, critical to think of children as already who are competent and confident learners, which sort of results in that kind of positive image of a child that the Whāriki is projecting. And there's quite a lot of text here, so let me just guide you through it. It's just the thinking that the curious child, the capable child, the creative child, the resilient child are all created from the Whāriki. All these views, they recognize children as a curious, that means they want to explore and learn about the world. The capable child, that means they have an active role in the society, that they have a positive environment that sort of provides them for the creative child. They can change, they can express themselves, they can work and recognize the opportunities. And the resilient child, that means is they will bounce back from bad experiences. And gosh, don't we know how many bad things happen to a child during the years, all the way from falling ice cream on the ground, all the way to not sharing the toys properly, all those small dramas that happen. How do you create a resilient child that is able to bounce back from the situation and be important? So the positive image of a child is really important, because the other thing is the negative image of a child, which the Whāriki is trying to work through and to really address and to make sure that we don't end up there. So no to spoiled child, no to the troubled child, no to the innocent child, and no to the miniature adult child, because we don't want to have stereotypes of children as a needy and in need, and or children as an innocent. That means is they are just like a flower, we need to protect them. No, children need to experience things during their early childhood, test the grounds, understand the limits, and they are not the miniature adults. They don't have to be dressed or treated as a miniature adult. So that's really important. So you can see the difference between the positive image of a child and the negative image of a child. So let's talk about assessment. It's always really interesting and fun, because that creates quite a good understanding of what the Whāriki is or how it sort of operates. So assessment is here to make the learning visible. That's really important. So teachers use that assessment really to find out about what children know or what they don't know, and what interests they have and how they are progressing, what are the new learning opportunities as suggested, and where the additional support may be required and short. So assessments are formative. They intend to support curriculum planning and enhance learning, and I will get back to that. It's very useful for informing children and families and the teachers about external support agencies, about children's learning and progress over the time. That's so important. But assessment is also both informal and formal. That really matters. Informal assessment really occurs in the moment as teachers really listen to and observe and participate and respond to children who are really engaged in those everyday, mundane experiences and events that I mentioned before, and really leads directly to the changes in teaching and learning environment, and it will help children to reach immediate and longer-term goals. So you can see it's quite well thought through how that assessment makes really foundation of the curriculum, and how it makes real assessment that really make how it make work. So that's really important. So let me just show you how it works. So key questions, how that I'm sort of asking in assessment is whose learning is really valued as part of that? How do teachers access what children know and can do? How do you know that children make progress and in what? And where do learning opportunities come from? And the Whāriki is so good at really reaching deep into the early childhood settings and centers and to really understand these kind of questions. Because answering those questions will make the learning really visible, will make learning really important. And everybody wants to know whether the child is learning and knowing something. How do we know that? How do parents know? How do children know themselves? And how do teachers know that they get the feedback on the work that they're doing, that their learning is actually, that the teaching that they've done is actually valued. So that means the learning is powerful. So we have three types of assessment that we're using. We have assessment of learning, for learning, and for teaching. Now, I'll just very briefly go through all three of them. So assessment for learning means that that's a formative process of gathering information about learning and support that's learning. What it means is that you're providing a feedback on what's happening, thinking it will be picked up later on by another teacher or a child or a family and taken into consideration as we're going to go through learning. Assessment of learning is very different. That's a summative part. That means that it provides that kind of account of what child knows and attitudes and skills and knowledges. But that's fairly limited because you may think, oh, what am I going to do now? You just say excellent development. Well, that doesn't tell us really nothing about what child knows. What are some of those positive key features? What the child has learned? What are those skill sets that the child developed? What are those knowledges that the child now operates and so on? But it's really important to understand if you're trying to wrap up certain area of a child's being. So, for example, if the child is transitioning to school, it's really useful to have some summative account, excuse me, of child's learning. And the third one is assessment for teaching, which is quite exciting and really important. But really thinking, well, we're making use of assessment to inform teaching, taking actions, making reflection, and so on. But what does that all mean? So we have this assessment for learning, assessment of learning, and assessment for teaching. Question is, how do we integrate all of them together? So we can do formative learning, formative assessment, summative assessment, and as well as some assessment that will allow us as a teachers to be reflective practitioners, to take action on particular items, and so on. So there is that famous garden analogy of if you think about the concept as you think of students as plants. I know that's crazy, but let's just run with it for a second, that we think of students as plants. So you have formative assessment on one hand side, which is like equivalent of feeding and watering the plants. And, you have appropriate, identify the needs, directly affecting their growth and development. And there's a summative part, which is the equivalent of the measuring of the plants. It may be interesting and important, to sort of compare and analyze those measurements, but in itself, that doesn't really affect the growth of the plant. So you can see the difference between formative assessment and summative assessment. And the Whāriki is really focused on that formative assessment because we believe in the future. We believe that what we do as a teachers will impact a long-lasting change. That's the point of the Whāriki. So we have the formative assessment, but summative assessment is also really important because it helps us to really understand, but do we always need to know how one child measures against the other, or how the child is measured against some kind of a milestone? Well, there are reasons why we want to know that. And in certain aspects, it is important. But on everyday, mundane, we want to make sure the child is developing according to its own needs and its own way how it is. And I know it about my children. I know my children, how they are. And I don't need them to be compared to other children. I need them to be compared to themselves. I need them to understand the growth that they've taken while they were in a childcare, while they were in kindergartens. I need them to understand, and they do, and I will show it very briefly because I have some some evidence on that, how they progressed through those years. How do they understand that they've learned something and they are proud about it, and they are the knowledgers and they are the carriers of the knowledge? And it is really, really important. So let's just move on. Keeping it complex, so important when we take assessment. So if what we assess, if we as a teachers, we look every day as we work with children, if we are to assess two simple facts, then we will not in any way do justice to respect all the complexities of the Whāriki that exist, or the curriculum framework within which you work. Because the Whāriki doesn't separate the social, the emotional, the cognitive, the physical. So we will not in any way do justice or to respect to that. By the way, all those images, they are images of my children. So they give me permission to use them. The close connection between children's learning and the 3 R's that they are: the reciprocal, the responsive, and the respectful relationships between people, places, and things in our settings. So those 3 R's are really important: reciprocal, responsive, and respectful. They're just so important. And the idea that these outcomes, they really include and create a sense of identity as a competent and confident learner. You can see what I've just done. So let me just quickly rephrase it. If you look at curriculum and the Whāriki is something very complex, and you derive from it that idea of assessment, and if you keeping it complex at assessment rather than simplifying it to asking one simple question or addressing one simple area, you are enabling that reciprocal and responsive and respectful relationships. So assessment is not just something that you do on a child, but it's something that you do with a child, and sometimes children are doing themselves. You enable their identity, their agency, their stake in the learning, their sense of belonging. You come into the strengths and principles of the Whāriki through the idea of assessment, looking at the outcome of a competent and confident learner as something that's developed just through the way that we assess. Because assessment for all children will be consistent with the principles of the Whāriki. Here you can see another picture of that woven mat that sort of exists. And that's just so important because, believe me or not, I've been around for some time, assessment can be also very harmful. And a lot of us who've been through schooling, we witness the environment where the assessment can categorize and punish and be really disrespectful to children and to families and their cultures. And it's important that the assessment is used in a way that's rigorous and really help the child and the family and support them, rather than to tell them what they don't know. The best assessment in the world is that tells the child what they've learned, what they know. Yes, we can then pick up how to extend what they know, but the question, does everybody needs to know everything, and therefore we're just constantly going to tell something negative to children, what you don't know? You want to tell them what they know. That's the best way, because it is about the new language of learning that we're trying to develop through the curriculum framework. Children as active participants in their own learning, as a capable, developing their own working theories about everything around them, about themselves, about people, about places in their lives, and so on. Children who are really the valued and fully active learners, who choose, who plan, and who challenge. That kind of climate of reciprocity, listening to children, even if they cannot speak, and observing how they feel, that curiosity, the interest, the knowledge, the encouragement to make them to contribute to their own learning. So you can see where I'm getting at with that assessment. The assessment is one of the examples through which you can see the power of the curriculum, the power of the Whāriki that focuses on those motivational aspects of learning rather than those fragmented skills and knowledge, encouraging teachers and parents to really support children's ongoing, those learning dispositions. They are so important to develop and to be part of that. So what then really matters, if you look at the child, the planning, the holistic view, the engagement with families, the learning dispositions that we have, the working theories that the child develops about the world, and early childhood-centered philosophies as well, because the philosophies that we carry as teachers in the centers need to be in line with the the curriculum and with the way how we want to engage. But those philosophies is what the children will be learning and what the families will really understand. It's so important to be clear about our own engagement with the idea, what we believe in, what really matters. How do we see the child? How do we see the family? What do we think of community? All those things matter so deeply and so dearly. So in that way, the young children will really making it of a child-centered approach. And children make their own judgments about their achievements. They develop their own sense of what counts as good and good work for themselves as learners. Children often need to self-regulate, that is, they are self-assessing and giving themselves instructions about what to do. This includes seeing mistakes as a part of the process of learning. And that's really important because the mistakes that we make as adults and as children, they are not mistakes that we need to be told that this is the fault, this is not what's happened. They need to be part of that learning, part of the assessment, and for children to recognize, and us as adults as well, that that's fantastic that you made a mistake. Look how much you progressed, how much you've learned. And children decided what to record and what not in their assessment portfolios. And I will come back to those portfolios, those ideas of the stories, because when the resources are being used by children, for example, a completed puzzle or provide feedback about their performance, this is just so important. This matters so, so much. This is part of that overall story. Hold on. Right. So the documentation that sort of exists is just so important because the documentation includes the material communication tools. They are sort of appropriated or developed by teachers or practitioners or researchers for the purpose then of recalling and reflecting and rethinking and reshaping that learning and teaching, that knowledge and understanding. And the key purpose of the documentation of that every child has is to support the construction of the child's identity, their own understanding of the learning journey. It's not for the teachers or the adults to really know what that kind of identity or learning journey is. It's about the others in the local community in discussion about learning, what it means. The children need to appreciate and understand what that learning is. So let me explain you how the learning is on this image of the elephant. So you got these blind scientists that are running around the elephant, and they're all looking at it and they are touching it and saying, hey, it's a spear. Oh no, it's a snake, it's a tree, it's a rope, it's a wall, it's a fan. Because they are looking at the individual aspects of the animal, of the elephant. They are examining it, touching it, feeling it, trying to understand it. But at the same time, what is missing? We all know what's missing. We are teachers. We know what's missing. What's missing is stepping back and realizing this is the holistic view of a child. It's not about those individual aspects. How can we understand the whole child if we're going to focus just on these kind of individual domains or individual aspects? We need to really step back and looking at the child fully and wholly. We know it as a teachers, but often some professions like scientists, they would be focusing and researching just one aspect. That's not necessarily that helpful. So, and we got there through a particular story of assessment, and I will just show you now some of the examples of old assessment activities. So like we all know it because this is the traditional developmental ways how to think. So you assess and look at the child like through time sampling. So you entering what happens at what time, what kind of behavior happened, and what kind of activities, and who the child interacted with, what weather was, and we know all those kind of types of assessment. And here we have another one very similar, recording inclusion and exclusion events, how the child were. I mean, these are fantastic for gathering particular knowledge or information about children, but it's not really that holistic view that we really need. Even these kind of old school learning stories, I mean, those were the beginning of thinking what learning stories could be. So you have some kind of ideas or examples or cues, and then you write the short learning stories about the child. And then you get down and you say, what's the short-term review and what next should happen with the child? I mean, it makes all sense, and it's all really old school and really thinking what it is. But what I want to really show you is this, is that the learning stories that sort of exist, that we use here in New Zealand, are developed here in New Zealand, are just amazing and fantastic tool, not without the fault, not without the critique, as everything is, but they are absolutely amazing, and people have been picking up and using them all around the world. And part of it is this, that there are structured narratives that really track the children's interests and strengths, because it's about development of children's identities as those competent learners, as I talked about. And it's about how they include the interactions between adults and learners, or between peers. And often it's about that episode is dictated by the learner as a child's voice. And how those learning stories can really track or document progress over time, which is so important, that the learning is seen as a over the time. It's not just a time sample. And that's so important. So teachers write those learning stories by capturing their observations. So you see that observation is really important of the children's experiences. And then they seek the perspectives of a child, of a family, and where possible. Obviously, not always it is possible, but now with particular technology, it's very simple. And I will show you some examples very, very, very quickly soon. So it's about interpreting the meaningful learning from these observations and collaborations, and the emphasis on relationships, on the whole child, or empowering the child as a learner, and connections with family and community are really, really important. So this is, for example, one of the learning stories, how it looks like. This is the learning story of my child. So I have a mention story, and it's about the harvest season. And you can see how it's written by a teacher about my child. So it's talk about the harvest season, and it's like a letter to a child. Dear William, well, that's the name of my older boy. And you can see what he was doing, how he was learning about harvesting, about what happens in the garden of the Early Childhood Center, and how he was helping the chef Raymond, what he was doing, how he was persistent, what kind of learning goals, asking questions of William. Dear William, do you often do gardening at home? Looking at those connections with the family. How can the extended learning that's been happening in early childhood settings? How can the child, and setting up a goals for a future of a child's learning, like, for example, here, be in charge of your own learning, problem solve and persist, because, oh, look at the box, it's very big. How am I going to work with that? What am I going to bring? How can I incorporate others in helping me? I'm on my own. How can I get others to collaborate, to help to carry that box? How you can create a respectful behavior and respectful manners to work with others, to with the environment. So you have it all. And this is my older one. This is my younger one. So you may ask, okay, so what about the young ones? This is George. This is I think here he was just 1 year old, but now he's 2 year old. Now he's a big boy. And it's called The Patience and Persistence Pays Off. And he talks to him again. Jenny is writing to George. Teacher Jenny is writing to George. Georgie, you have shown plenty of interest in puzzles recently. So it's creating a narrative for a child, and it's then showing exactly what's happening. How can, through persistence and patience, create particular ideas about problem solving, and how you can work with others. You can see how the young children are creating and fulfilling the puzzles together, learning through play, and it's really important to write those narratives, because it's about recognizing also what is happening. That means is what kind of learning is happening as the child is playing, because it's not just a play, but also what kind of learning goals are really in play, like, for example, problem-solving, persistence, working with each other and alongside each other, and so on. So you can see this is really, really important, and which sort of creates this kind of idea of how that assessment overall in early childhood education, in what ways we are how in those everyday practices, how we as a children, families, teachers, and others, how we observe the children's learning. That means how do we notice, how to strive to understand it. That means to recognize what kind of learning is happening in that curriculum and to put that understanding into particular good use. How do we respond as a teachers to these knowledges? Because if we only notice, if we only and then recognize, that doesn't mean that we are able to make the translation, to respond, to really make use of it. And then what happens next is recording or the documentation, and then continuing to revisiting it. So for example, my children, they would revisit their learning portfolios, because all these learning stories, they're obviously printed, placed into the portfolio. They also online through the online tool available for parents to log in and to see them and read them. But the children themselves, when they're able to revisit and to understand, look at me, 2 years ago, I didn't know how to do this, but look at me now, how I know to do it. They track their own learning. They track their own goals. They extended learning to families. They get their parents excited about the children's learning. And that's so important. So here you can see some sort of further ideas, what's been happening and about the practice in Outra, New Zealand. And that's really important, because making assessment holistic by including various skills and learning and so on. So, you know what, I'm sort of thinking, I have so much more to share. How about we stop here for now and get opportunity for some questions and answers? So we utilize the time, because I could talk for another hours and hours. Shwati, what do you think? Is it a good time to stop, to let some questions in and to have some conversation?
Marek, let me just see if there are questions. Let's ask the audience that if they want to post a question, they could. You could take 1 or 2 slides more till the questions come in, so we waste no time. Till now, they have not started asking, thinking that you're going to continue for some time. So I think if you can take a few, but I can also ask our EC members if they have any questions to just put it down on the chat.
Some questions, because I feel I've been talking like, I feel I've been doing something that I hate myself. I've been talking at you for such a long time. So let's just...
But you've been so interesting.
Could I ask?
Yes, please.
Could we ask
please go
questions?
ahead. Yes, please.
Yeah. I think Vrinda is asking.
No, you ask first, Rekha.
You go ahead, Vrinda. I'll ask after you.
So, Marek, first of all, I must appreciate the way you have presented today. I think we all know and heard about the New Zealand curriculum, but the way you explained to us to make us understand how different it is and how creative, I would say, it is in terms of having a very, very child-centric look at the whole field of early childhood, which I feel I really appreciated it today. I have 2 questions. One is related to the policy. While you have primary education free, it seems that early childhood is not completely free, and it has its subsidies and things like that. Considering that in the current last 2 decades, the way the emphasis has been about 0 to 8 being very crucial in establishing the development for the later years, I would have felt that the policy would have changed and there would be more emphasis on including early childhood so that everybody is able to get that. So I was wondering why that policy doesn't change. And the second question, I felt that the way, that everybody has to follow this curriculum is excellent. And I feel the implementation of the curriculum requires teachers who really understand the depth of this. It is not, just what you teach. Have you understood that? But there are so many other aspects which the teacher has to. And so I'm wanting to know that, one, is there any expected teacher qualification? Is there any kind of a regulation like licensing or something so that everybody is of a particular level of understanding? So these two questions I have. Thanks, Marek.
Oh my goodness, what amazing questions. Thank you so much for asking them. I mean, they are such a good questions, and right at the heart, I would say, at the complexities and contradictions of having a curriculum like this in New Zealand. So first I will try to answer the question of the policy. I mean, how come that you can have despite that interest and all the narratives that we hear from every organization that relates to children and childhood, that how important is the first 1,000 days, 2,000 days, and birth to aid and everything, yet we provide so many barriers for the children to experience high quality early childhood education. I cannot agree with you more. The problem is that that early childhood education is has become over the years in Western countries a particular aspect of a sort of business proposal. So what's been happening over the years is that, and this is the story of the Peter Moss, if he would be here, he would talk about this for hours, because he would tell you the story of the high income countries or the Anglophonic countries where pretty much the same thing happened. That means is that the idea of free public Frobelian kindergarten that we sort of understood from has sort of slowly disappeared and led the way to the privatized conglomerates of various sort of organizations that are sort of seeing for-profit opportunities in the childcare. And there's been a long-term tension that we had here, because here, you know, most of the early childhood settings are private or community-based in New Zealand. That doesn't mean that they are not great or they are not quality early childhood settings they provide. What that just simply means is that the government has still yet not reconciled whether it's really important to fully subsidize and fully invest into early childhood education. They see its importance, but they also see it as a sort of that it's just such a it's just so much money and such an investment. So we slowly are persuading government to invest more into early years and early childhood, but also the government is asking, why should we invest into private organizations if they can survive in the market and if there is a supply and demand? So comes the neoliberal argument into play. So it becomes a very complex thing and very frustrating things for us as researchers or former teachers, because we do believe in education being free and to provide the best possible experiences for all children, all families. Yet we sort of know that not every child and every family can afford high quality early childhood education. Often it happens that there are different sort of options how to do it. Like, for example, for some aspects of families who are low income families who are, for example, on benefits without work. So one of the requirements for those families is to enroll their children into early childhood education in order to receive the benefits. So it goes sort of both ways. It's a very complex environment, and I would like to invite you to come here to New Zealand, and I will show you around, and we can have a very long debate around this and how to potentially change that system, because the idea of because you're absolutely correct, we have increased funding into the system, but it doesn't all, and often and then on certain level, then you have the thinking in some ethnicities that, well, maybe the child is better to be with the grandmother than to sort of go to an early childhood setting, and they and some then families, they don't have such an opportunity. They have moved on, they live in a different city with the grandparents. So how do you sort of reconcile that? So we have the response is sort of parent-led of an early childhood settings, but again, it requires parents to be very deeply involved in the early childhood education. So it's a very complex environment, to tell you the truth, but I would say it's the neoliberalism that we have mastered in the high countries that is sort of causing the idea that why early childhood education is not free for everyone all the time. Your second question is perhaps even more interesting, because you're getting at the core, what's the problem with the Whāriki? The problem with the Whāriki is that the Whāriki is such an amazing document, and it is. Everybody who comes or who uses it, they love it, because it's an curriculum framework. It's not prescriptive, it's very aspirational. It allows all the centers to function on different theoretical frameworks. They can be Montessori, it can be Reggio, it can be Waldorf, it can be variously inspired, it can be traditional, it can be indigenous. It creates the best of every world, and it allows everybody to read it and to interpret it, sort of in a certain way. And now the question is, for you to be high quality center, and let's not go what the quality means, because we know the quality is, you need to be able to read the Whāriki in particular way and implement it, and to be engaged every day with the children, with the emergent curriculum, which means is that curriculum is so good and so non-prescriptive and so philosophical in a certain way that it requires a highly trained, very well-positioned philosophical teacher to make a full use of the Whāriki, to fully unleash the potential of the document. So what you're getting at is that it basically requires a highly trained teacher that requires particular teacher education program that will allow and fully support, such a development. Well, and here comes the issue is that, well, we're not always getting that. So there is that mismatch between what kind of teachers are entering the system and learning with and working with the Whāriki, and what the Whāriki is sort of asking us to do or allowing us to do. And that's an never-ending struggle and debate. We just had this debate this week, to be honest, about how do we honor the Whāriki? How do we make the most of the Whāriki? So that's a really important question. Now, with respect to qualifications, it's again linked with the funding. So government is very clever in this way how they distribute funding. They just don't give funding. They will tell you that we will make a funding work according to how many qualified teachers you have in your center. So, for example, let's say that you run and you have a very small early childhood center just with 5 teachers. So they will tell you if you have 60% of qualified teachers, that means with bachelor's degree, that let's say that's 3 out of 5, you will get that much funding. If you have 80%, it means 4 out of 5, you will get that much funding. So they will increase the funding because they will assume that the higher quality teachers, the better they will work with the Whāriki. But they are yet to make a commitment. They made a commitment in the past and they dropped it, that they would expect teachers to be high quality. Because it seems to be too much asked. The sector that's sort of struggling with the working conditions, working conditions of teachers in childcare are really difficult. It's a hard work working with young children, give them everything. So it means it's an issue with the environment, the resources, the pay, just the noise, that happens in early childhood. So you can just think of that while there is such an fluctuation of teachers that sort of come and go from early childhood centers. So the government is quite worried how it will cater if you say 100% of qualified and there is such a massive dropout center. So they fund up to 80%. So 80% they fund, but we have many centers who disregard that, and they have 100% of qualified teachers because they understand that having a fully qualified workforce means better take care of early childhood. But there is also that, and I have a lot of my students who are doctoral students, for example, of me, but they coming from India, for example, or from other countries, but they do doctorate with me. That means they are not qualified in New Zealand. They still can work in early childhood centers because they make up that 20% of non-qualified workforce, but highly skilled workforce. Non-qualified doesn't mean not to have experience, not to have a skill set. I know of some teachers who are 60, 70 years old, very experienced, amazing teachers who work so well with teachers or with children, but they never qualified because that wasn't part of their story. And they didn't want to go back when they were 40, 50 to go back and requalify. So it's a long story about like every country, as you know, like in India, very complex story of certification, of legislation, of a teachers' council, of the review office, and we spend hours and hours talking about it. But I think these are excellent questions that sort of really highlight the complexities of the Whāriki. And I think what we need to do is we need to get more of them together and to run more and more workshops and more work together to really understand how, for example, those curricula compare, how those teaching workforces work. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Marek.
Thanks, Marek. I think we'll request Rekha. Ma'am, she wanted to ask a question. Rekha, ma'am, please go ahead.
Yeah. And thanks so much, Mark, for an inspiring presentation. Learned a lot of new ideas. Part of what I wanted to ask you sort of covered in your last comment, but I would still ask for some greater clarity. How would a day look like in a school which practices this curriculum? You know, you last remarked that the schools are open to take up, let us say, an emergent curriculum, a Waldorf curriculum. Maybe perhaps you didn't mention that, but maybe even a Montessori curriculum. What about, you know, schools? Are there schools which practice a top-down curriculum, you know, where they just treat straight off language, mathematics, and, you know, things like that, an academic curriculum? And how does that sit with the Whāriki curriculum, and how is that regulated? Is the school free to decide how it will shape its, you know, the whole month-by-month calendar through the year? Are there some, you know, there's some organization to which you sort of give your curriculum, which says that, yes, it is in line with the principles, the Whāriki principles? These were some of the areas. The practical implementation of it, basically, is if you could throw some light on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I just clarify, when you say schools, you mean early childhood centers, right? Kindergarten.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
No, very, very good. Very good. So it's a very good question. I would say majority of early childhood centers are really following early childhood curriculum, the Whāriki. And I would say while the quality will differ, like in any kind of country, as you go from center to center, I think overall most of them are utilizing the Whāriki and the key principles and key thoughts. And part of that is because it's linked to the funding, because government is clearly saying, and because you have a implementation of the Whāriki, that means is you have a regular visits from the Education Review Office, who will assess how you actually using the Whāriki, not necessarily only on a day when you come, but over the time. You know, that's very important. They will look back at children's portfolios, for example, to see how the learning has occurred over time, what kind of learning stories teachers have created, what kind of policies and practices center is implementing, what's happening. So it's a quite thorough review process that sort of happens on each center. So yes, I would say the Whāriki is being utilized quite well in most of the time, to variety of degree of succession. There, every month you get a story of early childhood centers that had to be closed, which is a good sign, which basically means that the officers are doing their job well, because they see what's not working. If all centers would be considered to be great, you would know something is wrong, because you know how in thousands and thousands and thousands of centers, there must be some that are not doing so well. To answer your second question, yes, there are. I would assume there are some centers that are sometimes looking at or considering a top-down approach, and it really depends. So I'll give you an example. There are some purists, as always, who would say never teach any, maths or literacy or something, and there are some that are sort of saying something else, interpreting the same curriculum a different way. And they would tell you, well, actually, I will teach that if the child is interested in that. If the child shows an interest, who am I not to follow the child's interest? Because then that principle of the Whāriki will override the principles that we shouldn't be actually focusing on individual domains and sort of doing this whole schoolification and creating out of early childhood a mini school, because children will have plenty of time to learn that during the school, to be successful. So you see what I'm getting at? You ask excellent question, because you ask, right, you talk about the ideal, about how it's actually implemented, what actually is happening in the center. And it's diverse. I think it works often, but there are centers that are doing it, and we have then some centers they are set up by particular cultural groups and they will have very specific needs, and they would argue we want our children to really focus on writing and reading and quite early on, because normally the literacy happens through play. And my children, they love letters and numbers, so they would be learning and using it, but they would be learning it through play. They wouldn't be learning through sitting down, let's learn numbers, let's learn, letters. It would be all introduced through play, through songs, through games, through various activities. But there are some centers who believe, no, we need something more structured, and we need to have that. And that happens like after school or after early childhood activities for them, So it's really, it's a very good question, and it's very hard to sort of answer, because the more there are some parents from some cultures who believe that it's not simply good enough. It's not simply good enough to be letting learning such an essential skills just on the interest of a child or on that. They believe that we should be actually really being more structured and more intentional in that. So there are two schools of thoughts that sort of compete with each other. Again, I would really want to invite you, I will host you, come to New Zealand, and we can visit some centers and do some joint research and think about that, how it compares. Yes.
Marek,
yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea for AECD to follow. And maybe we can plan a second webinar. I mean, the immediate something could be a second webinar for us to get into the nitty-gritty of what Marek has inspired us into thinking. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Marek, I understand and I really appreciate that you are doing it. It's night for him, though day for afternoon for us. But I would like to take a quick question, which is asked by Purnima Contractor about music. And the reason why I want you to answer this is basically music is such an important part of the curriculum. And what kind of music strands are included in the center early childcare curriculum in Whāriki? How does Whāriki view music as a part of the curriculum? Because that was not taken in. I know art and everything, but how big a part does music play, and how do you shape that?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a wonderful question to finish this webinar on, actually. So that's really good way how to sort of do. And before I answer the question, I just want to say, absolutely. I think the next time we should perhaps organize something in person or something, continue this in India or somewhere, to sort of really build up on that, maybe some good workshops and really hands-on, and because this is sort of like, it's hard to do it all online and without seeing and knowing anybody. So
do let us know when you're coming. We'll
absolutely. This will be just great. Yeah.
So music, really interesting and really great question. Really good one. All sort of arts, as we call them, arts in early childhood, I mean, are important. But again, there's that what kind of music is impossible question to answer. It's the music that actually really matters to children, speaks to children. It's the children's interest, because children are developing their skills by utilizing, for example, in a childcare that I work very closely with, all the instruments are being utilized as part of play. So instruments are completely available all the ground, and children just pick them up. Sometimes just happens, one child picks up an instrument and starts playing, and the other children come and join and pick up whatever they think to join the rhythm, and teachers support them in developing the music. The other days, the children demand that we want to have a disco, we want to dance. Well, the music that they develop is, they often make a demands. They have a competition. They're learning about how to work together, how to take turns, how to be part of life. And so you can see how the music suddenly becomes an really enabler on various other thinking and various other activities. And so they can Baby Shark, I mean, Wheels on the Bus. You go through the process of all the children's favorites, and we have obviously a lot of songs and a lot of singing and a lot of part of our indigenous culture. So it's a lot of traditional songs, Maori songs that are part of it. The children absolutely love. Like my children, they both, one is part of childcare, one just graduated from childcare. So they They love more indigenous, despite we are not indigenous as a family. They love indigenous songs. They will be singing them every day. They will demand that we sing with them. So the music, creation of music, but also music as a sort of way of a movement, dancing, or part of it is really important. One thing that's important, I would say, about music is so it's not overpowering. The other day I go every week to early childhood centers, to kindergartens. One center I recently visited, for example, has music quite loud. And you could see that it can be quite, not all children will subscribe to that, because children have a different needs. And now we far more understanding about diverse needs of our children. And we know they have different threshold for understanding and utilizing the sound. And so we just need to be respectful of everyone. We need to make sure it works for everyone. And part of that is to just checking with children if it works, because, and that's the beauty of the Whāriki, is to really incorporating the idea that learning is there for everyone, and we are all learning together. And there's that reciprocal and sharing of learning. And music is what a fabulous way how through music we can learn so much about mathematics, for example, how through music we can so much learning about ourselves, about actions and motoric skills, because a lot of the songs, as we know in early childhood, they incorporate actions. And that kind of idea of using our body with the music is just so good for development of the motoric skills. So I can't stop talking about music, because I think music generally overall is one of those wonderful, I would say, ways how in New Zealand it's very essential. It's one of those like your toolkits that you sort of use as a teacher. But I often think that when I go also around the world, that music is sort of used in a quite it's not appreciated enough what it can actually do and how it can actually really encourage those other ways of thinking and being. So there's so much. We could do the whole session on music next time on workshop. I mean, and the activities.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Marek. It was amazing. And I agree with you. Music is something that connects people from across the world, whether you know the songs, you know the words, as you said, that your children are not indigenous, but they are huge fans. And in India, we can see that with languages for almost every region, we have children learning words and picking up stories. From being an amazing tourist guide to tell us about New Zealand, to high quality curriculum, bird's view eye into Whāriki, the partnership, the explaining to us how the non-compulsory part of the Whāriki is actually grounds up, learning with play and reciprocity, to looking back at emerging ways of learning. It's been a knowledge-packed session, actually. I don't know whether should I speak about my learnings on principle and strands, but I think it would be amiss if I don't talk about beyond the gate as a concept, which I think so actually touched all of our hearts. The assessment, the way you look at it with the child and not of the child. I think all of us resonate with that, respecting. And in fact, one thing that touched my heart was the idea of a child, positive and the negative image, and the resilience as a quality that the children need to develop. I think so that is something which I'm seeing for the first time in a curriculum, that resilience needs to be important, because we keep hearing confident, curious. And one thing I would love you to do, and it was actually my question, but because of time, we are going to do that, is New Zealand Sign Language is also a part of the Whāriki curriculum, which includes the deaf and the hearing impaired, which is so amazing. Positive image of child, or should I say what we believe in, should drive us. And Whāriki's learning stories, and you were so kind to share your child's learning story. There's so much that we could learn from. And I wish, as Einstein said, time is relative. We could pack it and continue. And this 90 minutes have gone so fast. To end it, Marek, I would like to end with a Sanskrit shloka. Na chauraharyam, na bhratrabhagyam, na rajaharyam, na cha bharakari. Vyaye krute vardhateva nityam, vidyadhanam sarvadhanam pradhanam. What that means is, it cannot be stolen. It cannot be taken away by the king. It cannot be divided among brothers. And it is not heavy. Vidya, which is learning, is the only thing that only wealth, the more you spend, the more you gain. Marek, thank you very much for being the guru and teaching us about Whāriki. The learning and the Vidya has been very, very interesting. Thank you, all you viewers, for joining on a Saturday morning and making this learning journey interesting for all of us.
Thank you so much. And can I just really thank you, particularly Shwati, but also the whole AECED organization for being such an amazing force in learning and supporting teachers, and all the teachers who make time on Saturday to come and listen and to work with us here today, because I think that's a true testament to the power of early child education, to the teachers, how much they care and they really value learning and the work that you and the whole organization AECED is doing. So thank you. I'm so privileged to be part of this, and thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Kira.
Marek, thank you so much. This is Purnima Contractor. And yes, Vinda?
No, just saying thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank
Marek,
you.
when we